Okay, so today we're going to talk about, I posted the first article that I've already posted before on Facebook, but for some of you might not have known. It's kind of a series of papers that I've posted that I'm going to be reposting and filming a little bit on, titled The Bible. And I think one of the biggest problems that or the biggest hurdles that we encounter when we go and we talk about other people in the Bible is the question we have to ask ourselves, and the question that is very important is, if we're basing, of course, everything that I said in the intro video, then I'm going to be basing everything on the Bible. Not my opinion, it's going to be on the Bible. But the question then, to me, I'm like the eternal skeptic. I'm always thinking like, well, so who cares? What about the Bible? So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we even trust the Bible? Who cares about that? Isn't that just a book? And one of the things that in a lot of these papers have come from a personal journey that I had several years ago. Like I said in the intro, I grew up in a Christian home, always talking about the Bible and everything. And really, it wasn't until after I got out of college that I thought, man, what if everything I'm basing on my life is not true? And I really had to go and dig for answers in a lot of these different ways. And I know that there's some of you who have the exact same questions. Some of you I've talked to that have the exact same questions. Well, man, if I'm basing my entire life on the Bible and this Jesus guy, then we better have some degree of certainty as to whether or not that's valid. And a lot of people, atheists especially, they think that to become a Christian you have to leave your intellect at the door, to which I would say that's pretty ridiculous, because I like to think of myself as being someone who I'm very analytical. I like to study and I like to learn new things. And so as I began this challenge of looking to see if what I believed had any merit or validity, or if the Bible was true, I discovered some interesting things. And I believe that there's far more evidence that these things that we believe are based on stuff. They're not blind faith. They're not faith based on nothing is blind, and that is dangerous. And I would agree that that is dangerous and often stupid. And there's a lot of Christians out there who are doing it on blind faith. That doesn't mean they're not saved. It just means that it's a little bit foolish, and it doesn't have to be blind. The more we can base our faith on, the stronger it will be. And so one of the main arguments that I encountered, and I hear all the time, actually comes from the writer of the Da Vinci Code, Sir Lee Teabling, and he says, essentially it is, the Bible has been translated so many times. I mean, it's like, several thousand years old. The Bible has been translated so many times, over and over and over and over again, that there's no way that what we have today isn't just absolutely and utterly corrupted in every way. And as I began to talk to people out on the streets about the Bible and about God and just in general, that this same question came up several times. Well, you can't even believe the Bible. It's been translated too many times. And so I decided to look into that. And what I discovered is that really, like most arguments against the validity of the Bible, they're rooted in ignorance. And that's a word you're going to hear a lot, because that's one of the reasons I'm making these videos, is to get rid of ignorance. And by ignorance I mean just a lack of knowledge. And so I think one of the things that we say it's been translated too many times to be true, it really just shows a lack of understanding of the translation process, about what is actually being translated, and really just the history of how the Bible came to be. So that's what I'm going to talk about. The first thing we have to do is we have to throw out the idea that the Bible was translated like telephone, and it's easy. The idea is telephone is it was passed on from one person to one person to one person, and by the time it's been passed through several other people, the original message is so distorted that we no longer have any idea what the original message was, because the last one is so skewed. And I think really that's not a good representation of how the Bible was translated, because it wasn't done that way at all. I actually worked 2 years in a foreign language translation company, and as I went back to that, I thought, every single time we translated a document, we did not translate. Someone would not bring in a document in English and say, translate this into German, and then I would translate it into Spanish and then to German. That didn't make sense. It would always take the root language that it was in, and we would translate it directly to the current language, or the language that it was needed. So it'd be English to German, English to Spanish, whatever the base language was, always to something else. And that's exactly how the Bible was translated. one of the things that's really important to know when we talk about the historicity of the Bible and stuff is we do not have the original of the Bible. We don't have the original letter of Paul to the Philippians. We don't have that. But what we do have are just innumerable, well, I guess technically they're innumerable, but just tons and tons of copies that date very, 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 very back, close back to when the original would probably have been written. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a different one. But we actually have the New Testament was written in Greek, and we have over 6,000 copies of the original Greek. We don't have the original, but we have over 6,000 copies. That may not sound like much, but that's like 500 times more than any other historical document out there. And the crazy thing about these 6,000 copies is they are like 99.5% alike in their if you compare copy to copy, all 6,000, if you compare them side by side, they're about 99.5% textually pure. That means that 1/2 of 1% of all the copies don't agree with each other perfectly. And if you look inside that number, that may sound like a lot, but again, if you're comparing it with every other historical document, that is minuscule, not even worth mentioning. And then if you look at that 1% of things that don't agree, almost every single one of those things are grammatical errors. It'd be like if I wrote a paper and you wrote the exact same paper by hand and you forgot to put a period, well, that would count as a difference. And so you and I both know that most of those things don't matter. And then there's also the things that are substantially different. You know, one version might say Jesus said, and the other one might say Jesus Christ said. And so they don't change anything, but they're just but technically that would be considered a difference. And so when we translate the Bible, we do not translate, like most people would say, it was originally written in Greek and then it was translated to Latin. Well, it didn't go from Greek to Latin, and then we didn't translate Latin to German, and then from there German to English. No, another misconception is when we translate documents, we don't throw away the copies that we made the original translation from. Matter of fact, we keep them all. And so if I'm going to translate the Bible into English, I'm going to take all those copies that we have and I'm going to go back to Greek. I'm not going to go back to Latin. I'm not going to go back to German or whatever the sequence was. I'm going to go back to Greek because I still have the Greek copies. So when we translate, that's how we do it. Spanish, if we want to make a Spanish Bible, we translate that from Greek, not from English, from Greek. And so we go back and we do that. So really, that stepping of telephone doesn't exist. We're always going right back to the source. And so that's one of the ways we translate the Bible. So in addition to that, we also see that as time goes on, we continue to find more and more and more and more and more copies. So actually, the Bible is more accurate or more close to the original now than it ever has been. So because if I'm comparing it to 5 documents in the past, whereas 100 years ago, and then now I have 5,000 documents that I'm comparing it to, I'm more likely to be more accurate based on 5,000 copies than I am on 5, and that's exactly what we have now. Last thing before we're done is another thing to put things into perspective. The King James Bible was translated in 1611. They based their translation on essentially 6 New Testament copies that they had. And the earliest date for those 600, and we know that the earlier it is, the closer it is to the original date, the more accurate it is, more likely to be. When King James was translated in 1611, they used 6 copies, and the earliest date of those copies only went back 500 years before. Well, now we're using over 1,000 times as many copies, and some of them date back to 100 AD, which would be sometimes 20 or 30 years after the original was written. So actually, now that we have over 6,000 copies and dating back further and further, we are actually more close to the original than we ever have been, even in the King James Word. That's why a New American Standard or something like that is going to be more close to the original than even a King James, which was translated back then. Of course, that might offend some people, but so the whole idea we see here as we look at it, that the whole translated too many times to be accurate really doesn't apply, because we're always translating it back based on the original language anyway, and the more copies we have, the closer we're able to do that. One good resource I would like to give you for a lot of these topics we're going to talk about is www.carm.org. And there's also something on YouTube called the Ehrman Project, or it's EHRMAN project, and that there's a lot of talk about this stuff because Bart Ehrman is a guy who really fights against the Bible. So anyway, I hope that helps, and hope that sums up the video, or sums up the paper. Thanks.